Amira and Sabahuddin Garibovic are pioneers, Bosnian Muslims who have returned to land they were expelled from in the early 1990s, during their country's brutal ethnic war. They and their then-infant son had survived a year in a detention camp. When they moved back a few years after the war ended, they found little more than ruins where their home had been.
It was horrible. We didn't know whether to laugh or cry. We were happy to be back, but it was really very difficult because we didn't know where to start.
Today, the Garibovics have rebuilt their home and restarted their lives. But they are minorities, living in one of the few Muslim communities inside the Serb-controlled part of Bosnia.
Emotions pulled us back here, because you can only be your own master on your own land. And even now, if someone would try and move us from here, I would be ready to lose my life, but I wouldn't leave this land.
The Garibovics' town of Kazarets was once devastated by the war, but life is now slowly returning to the streets. The air is full of the sound of new construction and the Muslim call to prayer. Emsuda Mujagic is also a detention camp survivor. She spearheaded the return of war refugees back to town.
It was very difficult to work with people on healing the war traumas. It was difficult to prepare them to reconcile with other people.
The hard work was worth it. 70% of Kazarets' original inhabitants have moved back. But now, for the first time in years, Mujagic says she fears for the future.
I had a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning. Everything was good and people were returning. Then the situation started changing, and now everything seems to be going backward.
And hours away, in a suburb of the country's capital, Sarajevo, you hear similar worries. Jovo Janic runs a support group for Serbs now living in a predominantly Muslim area. They provide free medical checkups and legal advice to citizens going without. In Janic's Serb community, the talk also turns to worry.
We ordinary people somehow managed to get through the war. We're ready for peace. Today we live together, we have reconciled. But it seems that our fate is instead in the hands of those who have political power.
It was never going to be easy to put this place back together, from a war that taught the world the term ethnic cleansing. Between 1992 and 1995, 100,000 people died here. Mass graves are still being discovered. But 14 years ago, American and European diplomats persuaded bitter adversaries to sit down at an Ohio Air Force base and agree to stop the bloodshed in what has become known as the Dayton Accords. 50,000 NATO troops helped secure the peace, and extensive investment by the international community quickly followed. And to many people's surprise, the peace has held. Today, most of the country has been physically repaired. The capital, Sarajevo, still carries some scars of its 3-year siege, but otherwise feels like a normal, bustling city. The NATO operation has been replaced by a much smaller European Union mission of only 2,000 troops. And there have been some major structural reforms here.
All these things were done in the first half of this decade. Tremendous progress.
American diplomat Rafi Gregorian is second in command at the Office of the High Representative, the international body created by Dayton to supervise the country until it can stand on its own.
There were still 3 former warring armies here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today there's 1. There used to be 3 intelligence services. Now there's 1. There were several different taxation systems here. Today there's 1, and so on.
But these improvements masked a fragility in the political structure of the country, one that 14 years of peace have not fixed, one that now risks plunging Bosnia and Herzegovina back towards failure, just as life was beginning to feel normal, and just as the international mission here was hoping to leave. The Dayton Agreement carved the country into 2 autonomous ethnic entities, a Serb-majority area called Republika Srpska, and a federation predominantly of Bosniak Muslims and Catholic Croats. On top of this sits a national layer of government with its own ethnically based structure. This has been called the most overgoverned country in the world. There are 3 presidents here, each one representing a different ethnicity. There are 13 administrations from the state down to the local level, with 160 ministers on the payroll. And the cost of all this government? A whopping 50% of the country's GDP.
The Dayton Peace Accord was a monster. I mean, it created a monster country.
Srećko Letal writes for the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. He says this weak and complicated political system is now being manipulated by a new wave of nationalist politicians.
Bosnia and Herzegovina right now is facing the most difficult crisis since the end of its war. We have come into the situation where local leaders don't want to make it work. I mean, they deliberately block the work of joint state and entity institutions. And as a result, we are facing a major deadlock on almost complete level.
We do have these political tensions, and that's because of two diverging concepts. The one is of multicultural country, the other one is of divided ethnic country.
Haris Salajic is a veteran Bosniak Muslim politician who now serves as one of the country's 3 national presidents. He says he wants a more unified government.
All of us haven't done enough in the last 14 years to promote the positive values of what we call a modern society today. Bosnia and Herzegovina should be a normal, democratic country with the priorities of becoming a full member of the NATO alliance and a member of the European Union.
Reform of Bosnia's political system is a requirement for the High Representative to leave, and for Bosnia's ultimate prize, European Union membership. But Salajic's plan is a one-man, one-vote system that would have the side effect of putting greater power in the hands of the more populous Muslims, something Bosnia's Serbs say they will not allow. Republika Srpska's capital, Banja Luka, has also come a long way since the war. There is some extra money to spend here, from deals the Serbs have made on their own with countries like Russia. And the glistening new government headquarters sends the message: the Serbs plan on holding on to their autonomy.
A military camp.
Gordan Milosevic is an advisor to the Serb entity's prime minister.
Is there a difference of opinion between what the Republika Srpska wants this country to look like and what the Federation wants this country to look like?
Well, it is obvious, that's not a secret for anyone who knows Bosnia, that the main intention in Republic of Srpska is for Bosnia and Herzegovina to remain a strongly decentralized country in line with Dayton Peace Agreement. Those who are insisting on one-man, one-vote system, they are basically trying to provide for a circumstance that would allow for only one people in Bosnia to rule this country and to become a dominant group.
Milosevic accuses the international community, through its Office of the High Representative, of siding with the Bosniak Muslims to undermine Serb authority. He says the situation is unacceptable.
If there will be a foreign authority still imposing law after law, changing the reality of this country, without even consulting us about that, what is our option? To pretend ignorant and to follow imposition after imposition, or to say, okay, if that's the game you want to play, please run this country then, but without us.
Republika Srpska Prime Minister Milorad Dodik has gone even further, threatening to call an independence referendum. The Office of the High Representative says it isn't biased against Serbs, but Rafi Grigorian insists it is Dodik's government that is undermining the future of the country.
The Republika Srpska, which most proclaims that they want us gone, are the ones who are doing the most to block completion of these objectives and conditions. If they had we could have been gone 2 years ago, in 2007, for example, if they hadn't been talking about independence and secession, if they hadn't been blocking progress on the things that need to be done.
The Serbs' disdain is clear. Recently, a Banja Luka magazine ran this cover, mocking Grigorian and his boss, High Representative Valentin Inzko, as thieves plundering state coffers. Grigorian says Dodik has reasons to keep this argument going.
And Mr. Dodik is the subject of a wide-ranging investigation by the state authorities for corruption and abuse of office. For example, one case is about the RS government building, which should have cost 100 million marks. It cost 240 million in a no-compete contract given to a friend of his. So he's obviously nervous about that. Some people think he's even willing to go so far as to declare independence in order to avoid being held accountable.
Dodik declined our request for an interview, but has maintained that corruption investigations against him are politically motivated. Srećko Letal says that Dodik's personality and manner plays a large role in the political crisis.
You will hear everything from him, from very civilized and smart plans for a prosperous joint Bosnia and Herzegovina, to the crazy talk about referendum, splitting country, falling out.
Why do they support Dodik? Well, I think they support him because he's a strong figure, strong leader, and of course, people need a strong leader.
Miroslav Ajder is a correspondent for Republika Srpska state television. He says Dodik appeals to Bosnian Serbs' sense of national pride.
He can say no to Bosnian Muslims, to Sarajevo, to Bosnian central government. He can say no, even maybe he cannot, but he pretends to can, to Washington, to Brussels, to all those major international centers. He manipulates, and that's why people love him.
Ajder believes the Serbs are struggling with a kind of identity crisis.
Most of the Serbs in Bosnia won't recognize Bosnia as their own state. Vast majority of them would say, I'm not a Bosnian, I'm Serb, and that's it. But also, there's this desire to become a normal country, to have a normal life, to become European Union member. Because if you're in Europe, you won't have any wars, you won't have any instability.
But life as a normal European country seems further away as this crisis spirals out of control and takes on a poisonous ethnic tone. Last year, President Silajic called Republika Srpska a reward for genocide. But it is recent comments by Dodik, accusing Muslims of staging some of the biggest wartime attacks against them, that has created the greatest outcry.
It doesn't help when you have the Republika Srpska Prime Minister claiming that horrible war crimes for which people had been sentenced to life in prison were in fact manufactured by the Bosniaks in order to make the Serbs look bad. People of Bosnia and Herzegovina that I speak with tell me the psychological atmosphere is as bad, if not worse, than it was in 1991 and 1992.
These tensions and animosities that were for all the past years present mostly only on political level among local politicians now are slowly affecting ordinary people. And that's what is really dangerous. There is no material for a larger scale conflict. There are no more so many heavy weapons in this country. There are no more so many soldiers in this country. But there is enough for a major trouble that could and would continue shaking the situation in the whole of Europe for the coming years.
Even though American and European diplomats have tried to mediate in recent weeks, it seems unlikely that an internal consensus can be reached anytime soon over the future structure of the country. Gordan Milosevic says the concerns about renewed conflict are overblown. Still, he offers a stark perspective.
Do you think it's ever possible to have political discussion in this country that doesn't involve ethnicity? Or will this always have to be the structure of the country?
It will always be the structure of this country because this is such country. But it shouldn't, people shouldn't try to neglect reality. The way to deal with situation is to recognize situation. As long as someone has illusions or ideals that it can be changed, we will be nowhere.
Away from the halls of government, among people of varying ethnicities, you get a different picture of the crisis. Sabahuddin Garibovic sees a secure future only if leaders stop playing political games.
Only if something changes in this country, starting with the authorities that obstruct everything good for the people. They simply do not wish to help people have a better life.
And in the Sarajevo suburbs, Jovo Janic echoes the sentiment.
Unfortunately, the ordinary people that wish for peace do not make the decisions. Instead, it is the politicians who divide the people and create tensions among ethnic groups. The same politics that led us into war still lead us now. To have peace, we need leaders with different views.
As Bosnia's political battles continue on, its people are caught in the middle, and the country's last steps in its transformation from fragile post-war state remain on hold.